This video is on organic molecules. Do you remember how we said that elements come together to make molecules? This is what we're talking about in this video, the molecules that make up living things. There are 4 types of organic molecules: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. We're going to go through each of these types of organic molecules, learn about their structure, their function, examples, and then the scientific names of their parts. Looking at the 4 types of organic molecules, what elements are found in all the organic molecules? There's carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, over here is a phosphorus, and I don't see the final one, which is an S. Remember CHNOPS, CHNOPS. Those elements are found in all living things, and remember, they're found in organic molecules. That's what we're doing in this video, organic molecules. Look at the center of every single one of these molecules. What element is found in the center of all the molecules? There's a C, there's a C all the way around, there's a C in the middle, and then there are more C's around here. The answer is carbon. Carbon is the most important element in living things. It's found in every single organic molecule, therefore it's found in every living organism. I keep using the word organic. It's not what you find in the grocery store, meaning fruits and vegetables don't have pesticides or fertilizers. In biology, it means anything that contains carbon. So an organic molecule is a molecule that contains carbon. Organic molecules make up all living things. Let's look at some nutrition labels. Remember, these are the 4 types of organic molecules. So food usually comes from living organisms, so it should contain all organic molecules. Carbohydrates, there it is, total carbohydrates. Lipids, another name for lipids are fats, there it is as well. Proteins down here, and you'll notice nucleic acids are not shown. Nucleic acids are not listed on nutrition labels. Here's another food: carbs, proteins, lipids, again, which are called fats, and then no nucleic acids. So everything you eat that has come from a living organism, so fruits and meats and vegetables and breads, all have these organic molecules: carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Remember how we talked about this in the previous video and in class. Elements come together to form molecules. Well, we never said what type of molecules. Here we're talking about organic molecules, molecules that contain carbon. So there's an organic molecule. They come together to form cells, which come together to form organs, which come together to form an organism. We're going to spend time specifically talking about each type of organic molecule. Up first are carbohydrates. Examples of carbohydrates include any of these things. Write any of them down: ice cream, muffins, fruits, bread, rice, sugar, vegetables, pasta. Write down a couple examples of carbohydrates. Really, it's anything that has sugar. Make sure you write sugar down. The purpose of a carbohydrate is to give you quick energy or short-term energy, meaning you have energy for like an hour and then the energy's gone. Have you ever had a Red Bull? You have energy immediately and then you crash. So carbohydrates give you short-term energy. If you eat an apple, if you eat bread, if you eat just plain sugar, you'll get energy, but it will go away pretty quickly. The elements that are found in carbohydrates, if you look at this picture, I notice a C, an H, and an O. That's it. There's no other elements. There's only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. The shape of carbohydrates is always in the shape of a hexagon. So if you were to look at a carbohydrate under a microscope, you would see that they're all in hexagon shapes. Maybe there's multiple hexagons, but they're still a hexagon. The smallest unit of a carbohydrate, if you break it down really small, not down to elements, but down to its smallest unit, it's called a monosaccharide. Monosaccharide is pictured to the right. Notice it's in the shape of a hexagon. If you look at this ring, it has stuff hanging off the side, but it's still a hexagon. And an example of a monosaccharide is glucose. So the way that I remember this is mono means one, so one small unit of a carbohydrate is a monosaccharide. If you put 2 monosaccharides together, it's a disaccharide. Di means 2. There it is, 2 monosaccharides stuck together, that's a disaccharide. If you put many monosaccharides together, you get a polysaccharide. Poly means many. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 times all of these. That's a polysaccharide. An example of a polysaccharide is starch and cellulose. Starch is what makes up breads and pastas and rice. You eat starch all the time. Cellulose is what makes up plants. So starch and cellulose are types of polysaccharides, which are types of carbohydrates. Like I just said, we eat polysaccharides all the time. So I made a picture of polysaccharides. We have a bunch of hexagons stuck together. Let's pretend I eat a piece of pizza. And pizza has crust, and crust is made of bread, and bread is a carbohydrate. Specifically, it's a polysaccharide. Polysaccharides get chewed up in our mouth, get digested in our stomach and our small intestines, and they get broken down into the smallest unit called a monosaccharide. Our cells then use the monosaccharide for short-term energy. This is why we eat carbohydrates. The way that we name carbohydrates is kind of interesting. So notice all these carbohydrate names: glucose, fructose, sucrose, lactose, cellulose, maltose. Notice that all the carbohydrates are ending in the letters OSE. Not every single carbohydrate is named this way, but most are. So if you ever have a name of a molecule and you are unfamiliar with what that molecule is, if it ends in OSE, it's probably a carbohydrate. Next up are proteins. These are all examples of proteins. Again, write a couple examples. We have any type of meat. We have steak, hamburger, lobster, fish, chicken. Also dairy, cheese, milk. Anything that comes from an animal is usually a protein. Proteins have many functions. Our bodies use proteins for almost anything. You could come up with any function of a cell, and it's probably involving protein. For instance, proteins are involved in movement, structure, regulation, transport, defense, and they make up enzymes. All of these work in our cells. If our cells need to move something from one side of the cell to the other, it uses proteins. If a cell needs to defend itself against a bacteria or a virus, it uses proteins. The elements that are in proteins are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and the one that's different from carbohydrates is this one has an N, a nitrogen. This is a picture of a protein below: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Notice this R down here, don't write it. This is not an element, it's just a placeholder. That's where you would put any element and then you'd get a different protein. Ignore this R. The shape of proteins are usually illustrated as a circle. So if you see these chains of circles, this is a chain of proteins, a bunch of different proteins stuck together. The smallest unit of a protein is called an amino acid, and 2 amino acids stuck together is called a dipeptide. 3 or more amino acids stuck together are called a polypeptide. I remember this the same way I remember carbohydrates. Di means 2, poly means 3. So it must be 2 amino acids stuck together, and this one's 3 amino acids stuck together. Proteins are special because they fold and they twist together to form a 3D globular shape. This just means that they are 3D, that they become big globs and they transport around your blood and in your cells, and they're constantly working to do all kinds of things in your cells, and when they do, they're folded and twisted together. We eat all kinds of proteins all the time. If you had a steak or a hamburger or fish or chicken or cheese, those are all proteins. Specifically, they were big proteins, so they're called a polypeptide. We eat a polypeptide, bring it into our body, chew it up, break it down, and we break it down into the smallest units called amino acids. Here's another picture. Here's a polypeptide. You know it's a polypeptide because there are multiple circles stuck together. These circles each represent amino acids. They're stuck together, therefore they're a polypeptide. We break them down in our body, we chew them up, we have all kinds of enzymes that break them apart, and we get amino acids in the end. Amino acids are then used by our cells for all kinds of things. Remember, transport, defense, regulation, movement, all of those are uses of proteins in our cells. The next one is lipids. Lipids are fats. Lipids and fats mean the exact same thing. Unfortunately, we usually call them lipids, which is a little harder to remember than fats, but do know they mean the same thing. Examples of lipids include oils, butters, cheese. Anything that's fatty is a lipid. Lipids are long-term energy. Do you remember how carbohydrates were short-term energy? Lipids are long-term, meaning if you eat a stick of butter, you're going to have energy for a pretty long time. If you drink some oil, you'll have energy for a pretty long time. You're not going to get that quick burst like you would with sugar, which are carbohydrates, but you'd have sustained energy. You'd have it for a pretty long time. The elements that are found in lipids are carbon and hydrogen, and there are a lot of them, and a little bit of oxygen. So it's the same elements that are in carbohydrates, except there's way more C's and H's than there are O's. Look at this. Count up all the C's, count up all the H's, and then compare it to the number of oxygens. Way more carbon and hydrogen than oxygen. The shape of a lipid is exactly what's below. It's a long chain of hydrogens and carbons. See this long chain? Therefore, the chain is called a hydrocarbon chain. Hydro meaning hydrogen, carbon meaning carbon. So hydrocarbon chain is the shape of a lipid. The smallest unit of a lipid is called a fatty acid, and the large unit of a lipid is called a phospholipid. There's no real fun way to remember this one. Fatty acid is a small unit. 2 fatty acids stuck together, there's 1, there's 2, is called a phospholipid. What is special about lipids, unlike any of the other organic molecules, is it does not mix in water. Have you ever tried mixing oils, which are fats, which are lipids, in water? You can stir them around a lot, but they will never mix together. That's why if there's a big oil spill, you can't actually get the oil mixing with the water. It kind of just hangs on the top of the water, and eventually scientists or ecologists can scrape it off, hopefully, but it does not mix. It always stays on top or in the water. There are 2 types of lipids, saturated and unsaturated. Saturated lipids are anything that is solid at room temperature. So think of anything that you can keep on your counter and it's solid. So like butter, usually cheese, both of those are considered saturated. Saturated lipids, it turns out, are really bad for you. They clog your arteries, and that's how you get heart attacks. Unsaturated lipids are anything that are liquid at room temperature. So any of the oils, olive oil, canola oil, all of those oils are actually good for you, and you can have those. Don't eat too many of any of these things, but definitely do not eat the saturated lipids. Those are bad. Unsaturated lipids, those are good for you. So we're constantly eating lipids all the time. When we eat our lipids, we're eating the big version of the lipids, which are called phospholipids, and our body chews them up and breaks them down into fatty acids. Fatty acids are then used by our cells for long-term energy. Here's an animation. These are phospholipids. They get broken down in our body, and they get broken down into the individual fatty acids. These fatty acids are then used by our cells for long-term energy. Last one is nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are DNA and RNA. I have pictures of all kinds of living things because every single living thing has nucleic acids. Apples, they come from living things, they have nucleic acids. Bread, they come from living things, they have nucleic acids. Meat comes from living things, they have nucleic acids. That's why the nutrition label, remember at the beginning I showed you, did not include nucleic acids. The reason is because it's in everything, so they don't have to label it because everyone already knows nucleic acids are in every single thing you eat. Nucleic acids are storing your genetic information. This is how you get your information from your parent. This is how you were created. Your mom's genetic information and your dad's genetic information came together to form you. The elements that are in nucleic acids are carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus. So almost all of them with the exception of the last one. Remember, CHNOPS is with an S at the end. That's the only one that's not in nucleic acids. The shape of a nucleic acid is in the shape of a helix. So it looks almost like braided string together. It goes around and around together. The smallest unit of a nucleic acid is called a nucleotide, and there are 3 parts to the nucleotide. There's a nitrogen base, a sugar, and a phosphate group. You have to memorize this. The small unit of a nucleic acid is a nucleotide, 3 parts, are a nitrogen base, a sugar, and a phosphate. Notice if you put a bunch of nucleotides together, you'll get nucleic acid. There's the nitrogen base, there's a sugar, there's a phosphate. Nitrogen base, sugar, phosphate. Nitrogen base, sugar, phosphate. All of it is stuck together. This is a nucleic acid. Nucleic acids are simply DNA and RNA, and this is what they look like. It's a bunch of nucleotides, which are made of bases, sugars, and phosphates stuck together. So again, the large unit of nucleic acid is called DNA, which is spelled deoxyribonucleic acid. DNA is just the shortcut, the short name for deoxyribonucleic acid. And RNA, ribonucleic acid. There are two types of large nucleic acids. DNA is double-stranded and made of nucleotides. The bases are adenine, thymine, guanine, or cytosine. The sugar is called deoxyribose, and the phosphate is just called phosphate. RNA is single-stranded and made of nucleotides. The bases are adenine, uracil, guanine, and cytosine. Notice there's a uracil instead of a thymine, which was found in DNA. The sugar is called ribose instead of like in DNA where it was deoxyribose. And the phosphate is just a phosphate. DNA is really, really important because it stores your genetic information. This is how you became you. Your dad created sperm, and in his sperm was his DNA. Your mom created an egg, and in that egg was her DNA. The sperm and the egg came together, combined their DNA, and out popped you. Every single organism has a unique set of DNA, except if you're an identical twin. But if you're not an identical twin, it means your DNA is not like your brother's DNA or your mom's DNA or your cousin's DNA. You all have different DNA, different genetic information. Remember, nucleotides combine into DNA. And the way that they combine into DNA is the same way other things combine. You can take the small units, combine them together to make a large unit. So in this case, we took 4 different nucleotides up here, and they came together to form this one strand of DNA or RNA. There's the base, there's the sugar, there's the phosphate. Base, sugar, phosphate. Base, sugar, phosphate, and on and on. DNA and RNA can also break down into nucleotides, so you could also break them back into their individual small units. That's it. That's all I have. Write down any questions you have and ask me in class.